we finished off with Yusuf alayhi salam being almost like the king of Egypt. The Israelites, meaning the children of Yaqub alayhi salam. And he had 12 sons. Most of them went from Palestine to Egypt, and they lived there. The family of Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers. And people started to migrate and started to live in Egypt, and they were called the Israelites. These Israelites kept on migrating and reproducing until they became about 600,000 to 700,000 people over a course of about 100 years after Yusuf alayhi salam. And the original Pharaoh was a Coptic. The Pharaoh himself gave the high position of authority to Yusuf alayhi salam. And it is said, we're not sure, that the Pharaoh at that time of Yusuf alayhi salam, his name was Walid. He was the Pharaoh, and it was said that he converted to Islam. And then Yusuf alayhi salam took over the authority, not as Pharaoh, but as the authority. And Yusuf alayhi salam died, and from him came children, and from his brothers came children as well. As time went on, the people of Egypt, the Copts, the Pharaohs, started to associate themselves with pride again. And so nationalism crept back in. The Copts returned to become a nationalistic nation. When nationalism started to creep in, the first people they looked at was whoever was not part of their nation. Pharaoh after Pharaoh, pride started to creep in. The oldest trick in the book for Iblis, the Shaitan. And they started looking at the Israelites. They are not from our blood, they are not of our nation, they are not of our forefathers. Who the hell are these people? Go back to where you came from. And then what happened? The first thing they did was that they started to think of ways to take the Israelites out of the political positions and the positions of power and economy. Wealth and power, status, reputation, they want to break all of that first. And so what happened was that they started to extort them, and somehow they started to take away their land. The land went back to the Copts. And then the crops, the produce of their crops, went to the Copts. Any home or property was taken from the Israelites by force and given to the Copts. Anyone who shared the blood of the Coptics, they're the ones the Copts had to own the land, their produce, and their homes. And so the Israelites began to become subjugated and oppressed. Right up to about nearly 100 to 120 years after that came the real Pharaoh that the Quran talks about. Rasulullah ﷺ taught us that he is the worst creature of Allah in all of history. And so came this particular Pharaoh, who was a tyrant, unjust, full of pride. He called himself the God and the Lord of Egypt. People had to worship him beside God. He believed in God, but he believed that he is another type of God. In the Quran, Pharaoh used to talk about himself, I do not know any other God that you should worship beside me. Look at the Nile River as it flows beneath my control, and your plantation and everything else and your livelihood. He's not saying there's no God. He's saying he's another God. And in Egypt, he is the God that has to be worshipped. Because in Egypt, he is the one who provides them. Therefore, he deserves their worship. He deserves their worship in economically, politically, socially, in their lives. As for at home, he allowed them to worship whoever they want to worship inside their home. So he separated state and private affairs. Your religion has no place in my kingdom and my state and my politics, or in the way I run the country. No place. In the outside world, I make laws. I decide on the laws. If I want you to vote, I'll tell you to vote. I say what goes, I say what comes. Politics is mine, the law is mine, economy is mine, social interactions, business, it's all me. Therefore, you have to worship me in all that area. Privately, you can worship whenever God. You can bow your head down on the ground to whoever you want. That's none of my business, but don't bring it out into the outside world. That's how Pharaoh was. Now, Firoun split the people into a hierarchical system, like a pyramid. The nobles were right on top and the peasants right at the bottom. The peasants happened to be who? The Israelites. Allah says this in the Quran, that He subjugated the Israelites and made the people uneven, and He made them slaves, and He made them the weakest. They weren't allowed to live the basic livelihood as everyone else, as every other human. They were subhuman to Him. They were not allowed to work and get paid for their employment. They were not allowed to be in paid employment. They were only allowed to be slaves and serving, and the least they got was just a meal or two in a day just to keep them surviving. Their lives were worthless. It meant nothing. They weren't allowed to voice their opinion. They certainly had no place in the government, in wealth, in how to run the country, in anything whatsoever. And so they were subjugated in every sense of the word. Musa alayhi salam was sent to the people of the Copts and to free the subjugated and oppressed Israelites. And here's his story.